human work. First, biblical aspects. The Old Testament presents God as the omnipotent creator. A reference, Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, Job chapter 38 to chapter 41, Psalm chapter 104, Psalm chapter 104, and chapter 147. Who fashions man in his image and invites him to work the soul. Reference, Genesis chapter 2, verse 5 to 6. And cultivate and care for the Garden of Eden in which he has placed him. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. To the first human couple, God entrusts the task of subduing the earth and exercising dominion over every living creature. Reference, Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. The dominion exercised by man over other living creatures, however, is not to be despotic or reckless. On the contrary, he is to cultivate and care for. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. The goods created by God. These goods were not created by man, but have been received by him as a precious gift that the Creator has placed under his responsibility. Cultivating the earth means not abandoning it to itself. Exercising dominion over it means taking care of it, as a wise king cares for his people and a shepherd his sheep. In the Creator's plan, created realities which are good in themselves exist for man's use. The wonder of the mystery of man's grandeur makes the psalmist exclaim, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him little less than God, and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet." Psalm chapter 8, verses 5 to 7. Work is part of the original state of man and precedes his fall. It is therefore not a punishment or cure. It becomes toil and pain because of the sin of Adam and Eve, who break the relationship of trust and harmony with God. Reference, Genesis chapter 3, verses 6 to 8. The prohibition to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, reminds man that he has received everything as a gift and that he continues to be a creator and not the creator. It was precisely, and he continues to be a creature and not the creator. It was precisely this temptation that prompted the sin of Adam and Eve. You'll be like God. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. They wanted absolute dominion over all things without having to submit to the will of the Creator. From that moment, the will becomes miserly, unrewarding, sordidly hostile. Genesis chapter 4, verse 12. Only by the sweat of one's brow will it be possible to reap its fruit. Our reference, Genesis chapter 3, verses 17 and 19. Notwithstanding the sin of our progenitors, however, the Creator's plan, the meaning of his creatures, and among these, man who is called to cultivate and care for creation, remain unaltered. Work has a place of honor because it is a source of riches, or at least of the conditions for a decent life, and is, in principle, an effective instrument against poverty. But one must not succumb to the temptation of making an idol of work, for the ultimate and definitive meaning of life is not to be found in work. Work is essential, but it is God and not work who is the origin of life and the final goal of man. The underlying principle of wisdom, in fact, is the fear of the Lord, the demand of justice, which stems from it, precedes concern for profit. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 16. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 8. The apex of biblical teaching on work is the commandment of the Sabbath rest. For man, bound as he is to the necessity of work, his rest opens to the prospect of a fuller freedom, that of the eternal Sabbath. A reference, Hebrew chapter 4, verses 9 to 10. Rest gives men and women the possibility to remember and experience anew God's work, from creation to redemption, to recognize themselves as His work. A reference, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, and to give thanks for their lives and for their subsistence to Him who is their author. The memory and experience of the Sabbath constitute a barrier against becoming slaves to work, whether voluntarily or by force, and against every kind of exploitation, hidden or evident. In fact, the Sabbath rest, besides making it possible for people to participate in the worship of God, was instituted in the defense of the poor. Its function is also that of freeing people from the antisocial degeneration of human work. The Sabbath rest can even last a year. This entails the expropriation of the fruits of the earth on behalf of the poor and the suspension of the property rights of landowners. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest, and life follow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they live the wild beasts may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. Exodus chapter 23, verses 10 to 11. This custom responds to a profound intuition. The accumulation of goods by some can sometimes cause others to be deprived of goods. In his preaching, Jesus teaches that we should appreciate work. He himself, having become like us in all things, devoted most of the years of his life on earth to manual work at the carpenter's bench, in the work of Joseph. Matthew chapter 15, verse 55, Mark chapter 6, verse 3, to whom he was obedient. Luke chapter 2, verse 51. Jesus condemns the behavior of the useless servant who hides his talent in the ground. Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30, and praises the faithful and prudent servant whom the master finds hard at work at the duties entrusted to him. Matthew chapter 24, verse 46. He describes his own mission as that of working. My Father is working still, and I am working. John chapter 5, verse 17. And his disciples as workers in the harvest of the Lord, which is the evangelization of humanity. Matthew chapter 9, verses 37 to 38. For these workers, the general principle according to which the laborer deserves his wages. Luke chapter 10, verse 7. They are therefore authorized to remain in the houses in which they have been welcome, eating and drinking what is offered to them. Luke chapter 10, verse 7. In his preaching, Jesus teaches man not to be enslaved by work. Before all else, he must be concerned about his soul. Gaining the whole world is not the purpose of his life. Mark chapter 8, verse 36. The treasures of the earth, in fact, are consumed, while those in heaven are imperishable. It is on these latter treasures that men and women must set their hearts. Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21. Work then should not be a source of anxiety. Matthew chapter 6, verses 25, 31, 34. When people are worried and upset about many things, they run the risk of neglecting the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Which they truly need. Everything else, work included, will find its proper place, meaning and value only if it is oriented to this one thing that is necessary and that will never be taken away. Luke chapter 10, verses 40 to 42. During his earthly ministry, Jesus works tirelessly, accomplishing powerful deeds to free men and women from sickness, suffering, and death. The Sabbath, which the Old Testament had put forth as a day of liberation and which, when observed only formally, lost its authentic significance, is reaffirmed by Jesus in its original meaning. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Mark chapter 2, verse 27. By healing people on this day of rest, a reference Matthew chapter 12, verses 9 to 14, Mark chapter 3, verses 1 to 6, Luke chapter 6, verses 6 to 11, chapter 13, verses 10 to 17, and chapter 14, verses 1 to 6. He wishes to show that the Sabbath is His, because He is truly the Son of God, and that it is the day on which men should dedicate themselves to God and to others, freeing people from evil, practicing brotherhood and sharing. This gives to work its noblest meaning, that which allows humanity to set out on the path to the eternal Sabbath, when rest will become the festive celebration to which men and women inwardly aspire. It is precisely in orienting humanity towards this experience of God's Sabbath and of His fellowship of life that work is the inauguration on earth of the new creation. Human activity aimed at enhancing and transforming the universe can and must unleash the perfections which find their origin and model in the uncreated world. In fact, the Pauline and Johannine writings bring to light the Trinitarian dimension of creation, in particular the link that exists between the Son, Word, the Logos, and creation. John chapter 1, verse 3, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6, Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 17. Created in Him and through Him, redeemed by Him, the universe is not a happenstance conglomeration, but a cosmos. It falls to man to discover the order within it and to heed this order, bringing it to fulfillment. In Jesus Christ, the visible world which God created for man, the world that, when sin entered, was subjected to futility. Romans chapter 8, verse 20, recovers again its original link with the divine source of wisdom and love. In this way, that is bringing to light in ever greater measure the unsearchable riches of Christ. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 8, in creation, human work becomes a service raised to the grandeur of God. Work represents a fundamental dimension of human existence as participation not only in the act of creation but also in that of redemption. Those who put up with the difficult rigors of work in union with Jesus' cooperation, in a certain sense, with the Son of God in His work of redemption, answer that they are disciples of Christ, bearing His cross every day in the activity they are called to do. In this perspective, work can be considered a means of sanctification and unleavening of earthly realities with the Spirit of Christ. Understood in this way, work is an expression of man's full humanity in his historical condition and his eschatological orientation. Man's free and responsible action reveals his intimate relationship with the Creator and His creative power. At the same time, it is daily aid in combating the disfigurement of sin, even when it is by the sweat of His brow that man earns his bread. The awareness that the form of this world is passing away, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 31, is not an exoneration from being involved in the world, and even less from work. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 7 to 15, which is an integral part of the human condition, although not the only purpose of life. No Christian, in light of the fact that he belongs to a united and fraternal community, should feel that he has the right not to work and to live at the expense of others. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 6 to 12. Rather, all are charged by the Apostle Paul to make it a point of honor to work with their own hands, so as to be dependent on nobody. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 12. And to practice a solidarity which is also material by sharing the fruits of their labor with those in need. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28. St. James defends the trampled rights of workers. Behold the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you keep back by fraud. Cry out, and the cry of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. James chapter 5, verse 4. Believers are to undertake their work in the style of Christ and make it an occasion for Christian witness, commanding the respect of outsiders. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 12. The fathers of the church do not consider work as an opus servile, although the culture of their day maintained precisely that such was the case, but always as an opus humanum, and they tend to hold all its various expressions in honor. By means of work, man governs the world with God. Together with God, he is its Lord and accomplishes good things for himself and for others. Idleness is harmful to man's being, whereas activity is good for his body and soul. Christians are called to work not only to provide themselves with bread, but also in acceptance of their poorer neighbors, to whom the Lord has commanded them to give food, drink, clothing, welcome, care, and companionship. Reference Matthew chapter 25, verses 35 to 36. Every worker, St. Ambrose contends, is the hand of Christ that continues to create and to do good. By his work and industriousness, man who has a share in the divine art and wisdom makes creation, the cosmos already ordered by the Father, more beautiful. He summons the social and community energies that increase the common good, above all to the benefit of those who are neediest. Human work, directed to charity as its final goal, becomes an occasion for contemplation. It becomes devout prayer, vigilantly rising towards and in anxious hope of the day that will not end. In this superior vision, work, a punishment and at the same time a reward of human activity, involves another relationship, the essentially religious one, which has been happily expressed in the Benedictine formula, ora et labora. The religious fact confers on human work an enlivening and redeeming spirituality. Such a connection between work and religion reflects the mysterious but real alliance which intervenes between human action and the providential action of God. Second, the prophetic value of Rerum Novarum. The course of history is marked by the profound transformation and the accelerating conquest of work, but also by the exploitation of so many workers, an offense to their dignity. The Industrial Revolution presented for the Church a critical challenge to which her social magisterium responded forcefully and prophetically, affirming universally valid and perennially relevant principles in support of workers and their rights. For centuries, the Church's message was addressed to agricultural societies, characterized by regular cyclical rhythms. Now the gospel had to be preached and lived in a new Areopagus. In the tumult of social events in a more dynamic society, taking into account the complexities of new phenomena, of the unimaginable transformations brought about by mechanization. At the center of the Church's pastoral concern was the ever-urgent worker question, that is, the problem of the exploitation of workers brought about by the new industrial organization of labor, capitalistically oriented, and a problem no less serious of ideological manipulation, socialist and communist, of the just claims advanced by the world of labor. The reflections and warning contained in the encyclical Rerum Novarum of Pope Leo XIII are placed in this historical context. Rerum Novarum is above all a heartfelt defense of the inalienable dignity of workers, connected with the importance of the right to property, the principle of cooperation among the social classes, the rights of the weak and the poor, the obligations of the workers and employers, and the right to form associations. The orientation of ideas expressed in the encyclical strengthened the commitment to vitalize Christian social life, which was seen in the birth and consolidation of numerous initiatives of high civic profile, groups and centers for social studies, associations, worker organizations, unions, cooperatives, rural banks, insurance groups, and assistance organizations. All of this gave great momentum to labor-related legislation for the protection of workers, above all children and women, to instructions and to the improvement of salaries and cleanliness in the work environment. Starting with Rerum Novarum, the Church has never stopped considering the problems of workers within the context of a social question which has progressively taken on worldwide dimensions. The encyclical Laborem Exergens enhances the personalistic vision that characterized previous social documents, indicating the need for a deeper understanding of the meaning and task that work entails. It does this in consideration of the fact that fresh questions and problems are always arising. There are always fresh hopes, but also fresh fears and threats connected with this basic dimension of human existence. Man's life is built up every day. From work, it derives its specific dignity, but at the same time, work contains the unceasing measure of human toil and suffering, and also of the harm and injustice which penetrate deep into social life within individual nations and on the international level. In fact, work is the essential key to the whole social question and is the condition not only for economic development but also for the cultural and moral development of persons, the family, society, and the entire human race. Third, the dignity of work. Human work has a twofold significance, objective and subjective. In the objective sense, it is the sum of activities, resources, instruments, and technologies used by men and women to produce things, to exercise dominion over the earth, in the words of the book of Genesis. In the subjective sense, work is the activity of the human person as a dynamic being capable of performing a variety of actions that are part of the work process and that correspond to this personal vocation. Man has to subdue the earth and dominate it because as the image of God, he is a person. That is to say, a subjective being capable of acting in a planned and rational way, capable of deciding about himself and with a tendency to self-realization. As a person, man is therefore the subject of work. Work in the objective sense constitutes the contingent aspect of human activity, which constantly varies in its expressions according to the changing technological, cultural, social, and political conditions. Work in the subjective sense, however, represents its stable dimension, since it does not depend on what people produce or on the type of activity they undertake, but only and exclusively on their dignity as human beings. This distinction is critical both for understanding what the ultimate foundation of the value and dignity of work is, and with regard to the difficulties of organizing economic and social systems that respect human rights. This subjectivity gives to work its particular dignity, which does not allow that is to be considered a simple commodity or an impersonal element of the apparatus for productivity. Cut off from its lesser or greater objective value, work is an essential expression of the person. It is an actus persona. Any form of materialism or economic tenet that tries to reduce the workers to being a mere instrument of production A simple labor force with an exclusively material value would end up hopelessly distorting the essence of work and stripping it of its most noble and basic human finality. The human person is the measure of the dignity of work. In fact, there is no doubt that human work has an ethical value of its own, which clearly and directly remains linked to the fact that the one who carries it out is a person. The subjective dimension of work must take precedence over the objective dimension because it is the dimension of the person himself who engages in work, determining its quality and consummate value. If this awareness is lacking, or if one chooses not to recognize this truth, work loses its truest and most profound meaning. In such cases, which are unfortunately all too frequent and widespread, work activity and the very technology employed become more important than the person himself, and at the same time are transformed into enemies of his dignity. Human work not only proceeds from the person, but it is also essentially ordered to and has its final goal in the human person. Independently of its objective content, work must be oriented to the subject who performs it, because the end of work, in work whatsoever, always remains man. Even if one cannot ignore the objective component of work with regard to its quality, this component must nonetheless be subordinated to the self-realization of the person, and therefore to the subjective dimension, thanks to which it is possible to affirm the work is for man and not man for work. It is always man who is the purpose of work, whatever work it is that is done by man, even if the common scale of values rates it as the merest service, as the most monotonous, even the most alienating work. Human work also has an intrinsic social dimension. A person's work, in fact, is naturally connected with that of other people. Today, more than ever, work is work with others and work for others. It is a matter of doing something for someone else. The fruits of work offer occasions for exchange, relationship, and encounter. Work, therefore, cannot be properly evaluated if its social nature is not taken into account, for man's productive effort cannot yield its fruits unless a truly social and organic body exists, unless a social and juridical order watches over the exercise of work, unless the various occupations, being interdependent, cooperate with and mutually complete one another, and what is still more important, unless mind, material things, and work combine and form as it were a single whole. Therefore, where the social and individual nature of work is neglected, it will be impossible to evaluate work justly and pay it according to justice. Work is also an obligation, that is to say, a duty on the part of man. Man must work, both because the Creator has commanded it, and in order to respond to the need to maintain and develop his own humanity. Work is presented as a moral obligation with respect to one's neighbor, which in the first place is one's own family, but also the society to which one belongs, the nation of which one is son or daughter, the entire human family of which one is a member. We are heirs of the work of generations, and at the same time shapers of the future of all who will live after us. Work confirms the profound identity of men and women created in the image and likeness of God. As man, through his work, becomes more and more the master of the earth, and as he confirms his dominion over the visible world, again through his work, he nevertheless remains in every case and at every phase of this process within the Creator's original ordering. And this ordering remains necessarily and indissolubly linked with the fact that man was created as male and female in the image of God. This describes human activity in the universe. Men and women are not its owner, but those to whom it is entrusted, called to reflect in their own manner of working the image of him in whose likeness they are made. Work, because of its subjective or personal character, is superior to every other factor connected with productivity. This principle applies in particular with regard to capital. The term capital has different meanings today. Sometimes it indicates the material means of production in a given enterprise. Sometimes the financial resources employed to bring about production or used in stock market operations. One can also speak of human capital to refer to human resources, that is, to man himself in his capacity to engage in labor, to make use of knowledge and creativity, to sense the needs of his fellow workers, and a mutual understanding with other members of an organization. The term social capital is also used to indicate the capacity of a collective group to work together, the fruit of investment in a mutually binding fiduciary trust. This variety of meaning offers further material for reflecting on what the relationship between work and capital may be today. The Church social doctrine has not failed to insist on the relationship between labor and capital, placing in evidence both the priority of the first over the second as well as their complementarities. Labor has an intrinsic priority over capital. This principle directly concerns the process of production. In this process, labor is always a primary efficient cost, while capital, the whole collection of means of production, remains a mere instrument or instrumental cost. This principle is an evident truth that emerges from the whole of man's historical experience. This is part of the abiding heritage of the Church teaching. There must exist between work and capital a relationship of complementarities. The very logic inherent within the process of production shows that the two must mutually permit one another and that there is an urgent need to create economic systems in which the opposition between capital and labor is overcome. In times when capital and hard labor within a less complicated economic system used to identify with a certain precision not only two elements of production but also and above all whole concrete social classes, the Church affirmed that both were in themselves legitimate. Capital cannot stand without labor, nor labor without capital. This is a truth that applies also today, because it is altogether false to ascribe either to capital alone or to labor alone what is achieved by the joint work of both, and it is utterly unjust that the one should arrogate unto itself what is being done, denying the effectiveness of the other. In considering the relationship between labor and capital, above all with regard to the impressive transformations of our modern times, we must maintain that the principal resource and the decisive factor at man's disposal is man himself, and that the integral development of the human person through work does not impede but rather promotes the greater productivity and efficiency of work itself. In fact, the world of work is discovering more and more that the value of human capital is finding expression in the consciences of workers, in their willingness to create relationships, in their creativity, in their industriousness, in promoting themselves, in their ability consciously to face new situations, to work together, and to pursue common objectives. These are strictly personal qualities that belong to the subject of work more than to the objective, technical, or operational aspects of work itself. All of this entails a new perspective in the relationship between labor and capital. We can affirm that, contrary to what happened in the former organization of labor, in which the subject would end up being less important than the object, than the mechanical process, in our day, the subjective dimension of work tends to be more decisive and more important than the objective dimension. The relationship between labor and capital often shows traits of antagonism that take on a new forms with the changing of social and economic context. In the past, the origin of the conflict between capital and labor was found above all in the fact that the workers put their powers at the disposal of the entrepreneurs, and this, following the principle of maximum profit, tried to establish the lowest possible wages for the work done by the employees. In our present day, this conflict shows aspects that are new and perhaps more disquieting. Scientific and technological progress and the globalization of markets of themselves a source of development and progress expose workers to the risk of being exploited by the mechanism of the economy and by the unrestrained quest for productivity. One must not fall into the error of thinking that the process of overcoming the dependence of work on material is of itself capable of overcoming alienation in the workplace or the alienation of labor. The reference here is not only to the many pockets or non-work, concealed work, child labor, underpaid work, exploitation of workers, all of which still persist today, but also to new, much more subtle forms of exploitation of new sources of work, to overworking, to work as career that often takes on more importance than other human unnecessary aspects, to excessive demands of work that makes family life unstable and sometimes impossible, to a modular structure of work that entails the rest of serious repercussions of the unitary perception of one's own existence and the stability of family relationships. If people are alienated, when means and ends are inverted, elements of alienation can also be found in the new context of work that is immaterial, light, qualitative more than quantitative, either through increased sharing in a genuinely supportive community or through increased isolation in a midst of relationships marked by destructive competitiveness and estrangement. The relationship between labor and capital also find expression when workers participate in ownership, management, and profits. This is an all too often overlooked requirement and it should be given greater consideration. On the basis of his work, each person is fully entitled to consider himself a part owner of the great workbench where he is working with everyone else. A way towards that goal could be found by associating labor with the ownership of capital as far as possible and by producing a wide range of intermediate bodies with economic, social, and cultural purposes. These would be bodies enjoying real autonomy with regard to public authorities, pursuing their specific aims in honest collaboration with each other and in subordination to the demand of the common good. These would be living communities, both in form and in substance, as members of its body would be looked upon and treated as persons and encouraged to take an active part in the life of the body. The new is that work is organized where knowledge is of greater account than the mere ownership of the means of production, concretely shows that work, because of its subjective character, entails the right to participate. This awareness must be firmly in place in order to evaluate the proper place of work in the process of production and to find ways of participation that are in line with the subjectivity of work in the distinctive circumstances of different concrete situations. The Church social magisterium sees an expression of the relationship between labor and capital also in the institution of private property, in the right to and the use of private property. The right to private property is subordinated to the principle of the universal destination of goods and must not constitute a reason for impeding the work or development of others. Property, which is acquired in the first place through work, must be placed at the service of work. This is particularly true regarding the position of the means of production, but the same principle also concerns the goods proper to the world of finance, technology, knowledge, and personnel. The means of production cannot be possessed against labor. They cannot even be possessed for possession's sake. It becomes illegitimate to possess them with property. It is not utilized or when it serves to impede the work of others in an effort to gain a profit, which is not the result of the overall expansion of work and the wealth of society, but rather is the result of curbing them or of illicit exploitation, speculation, or the breaking of solidarity among working people. Private and public property, as well as the various mechanisms of the economic system, must be oriented to an economy of service to mankind, so that they contribute to putting into effect the principle of the universal distribution of goods. The issue of ownership and use of new technologies and knowledge, which in our day constitute a particular form of property that is no less important than ownership of land or capital, become significant in this perspective. These resources, like all goods, have a universal destination. They too must be placed in a context of legal norms and social rules that guarantee that they will be used according to the criteria of justice, equity, and respect of human rights. The new discoveries and technologies, thanks to the enormous potential, can take a decisive contribution to the promotion of social progress. But if they remain concentrated in the wealthier countries or in the hands of a small number of powerful groups, they risk of becoming sources of unemployment and increase the gap between developed and underdeveloped areas. Rest from work is a right, as God rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2. So too, men and women created in his image are to enjoy sufficient rest and free time that will allow them to turn to their family, cultural, social, and religious life. The institution of the Lord's Day contributes to this. On Sundays and other holidays of obligation, believers must refrain from engaging in work or activities that hinder the worship owed to God, the joy proper to the Lord's Day, the performance of the works of mercy, and the appropriate relaxation of mind and body. Family needs and service of great importance to society constitute legitimate excuses from the obligation of Sunday rest, but this must not create habits that are prejudicial to religion, family life, or health. Sunday is a day that should be made holy by charitable activity, devoting time to family and relatives, as well as to the sick, the infirm, and the elderly. One must not forget that brethren who have the same needs and the same rights yet cannot rest from work because of poverty and misery. Moreover, Sunday is an appropriate time for the reflection, silence, study, and meditation that foster the growth of the interior Christian life. Believers should distinguish themselves on this day too by their moderation, avoiding the excesses and certainly the violence that mass entertainment sometimes occasions. The Lord's Day should always be lived as a day of liberation that allows us to take part in the festal gathering and assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22 to 23, anticipating thus the celebration of the definitive Passover in the glory of heaven. Public authorities have the duty to ensure that for reason of economic productivity, citizens are not denied time for rest and divine worship. Employers have an analogous obligation regarding their employees. Christians, in respect of religious freedom and of the common good of all, should seek to have Sundays and the church holidays recognized as legal holidays. They have to give everyone a public example of prayer, respect, and joy, and defend the traditions as a precious contribution to the spiritual life of society. Every Christian should avoid making unnecessary demands on others that would hinder them from observing the Lord's Day.